Welcome to my mommy's podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. My kitchen is always stocked with their coffee mushroom blends, their matcha mix, and their straight mushroom drinks. Four Sigmatic has figured out how to get the benefits of mushrooms like chaga, lion's mane, cordyceps, and reishi into delicious instant drinks. My current favorite is their adaptogen coffee blend that has Tulsi and astragalus, but I love all of their products. They have options with or without caffeine, so if you're not a caffeine person, you can find products that you'll love. And I find that even their coffee blends that do contain caffeine have less than a normal cup of coffee, but don't let this fool you. I have found I get so much more focus and mental clarity from these mushroom blends than I do from regular coffee and without the jitters. The addition of the mushrooms, which are considered nootropics, meaning that they are good for the brain, makes these superfood blends more effective and much healthier than just regular old coffee. I love them with a dash of macadamia milk personally. I also love that many of their drink mixes are instant and packaged into individual servings, so they're perfect for travel or on the go. If you're listening to this, then you can get a special offer just for listeners of this podcast by going to wellnessmama.com/go/FOUR-SIGMATIC. That's wellnessmama.com/go/4-Sigmatic. This podcast is brought to you by Kettle and Fire. You may already know that this is my go-to bone broth because it is shelf-stable, it's easy to use, and it's delicious. But you may not know that Kettle and Fire just released brand new bone broth-based soups, which make it even more convenient to eat healthy on the go. Plus, they save a lot of time when you're trying to feed the whole family on a busy night, and they are delicious. They have miso, tomato, and butternut, and they're all really, really good. Plus, they have a 20-hour slow simmer process for their broth that extracts an insane amount of protein, 10 grams per serving, and this creates a collagen-rich broth that is great for hair and skin and nails. My favorite part is it only takes a minute to heat up any of these broths or soup on the stove, and I can keep a case in my pantry so it's there anytime I need it. Right now, you can save 10% by going to kettleandfire.com/mama, M-A-M-A. The discount is already built in, so just remember that link, kettleandfire.com/mama. Hello and welcome to the Healthy Moms Podcast. I'm Katie from wellnessmama.com, and I cannot wait to geek out in this episode. I am here with Rowena Gates, who is the Principal and Vice President for the ENG3 Corporation, a life science technology company addressing health, wellness, and performance, and we're going to delve into exactly how in this episode. She has focused on their business development and international strategic relations for more than a decade. She's also a serial entrepreneur and so inspiring. Prior to joining this current company, she spent 6 years as the founder and CEO of Averic, I hope I'm saying that right, Corporation, which provided internet-based solutions for international trade. She also co-founded a document imaging company, now doing business as ImageSource. Prior to this, she co-founded InPassage, one of the earliest companies to offer an internet-based solutions to the logistics industry. She received a doctorate from the University of Washington for her dissertation on international strategic alliances. So needless to say, she's wicked smart and super qualified, and I can't wait to jump in. Welcome, Rowena, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katie. It's a real pleasure.
And I'm so excited to get to chat with you about the science behind your current corporation and what it does. And I know that it involves basically working with and reversing DNA damage, but I think we need to start at the beginning and kind of define some terms. So to start, can you explain what DNA damage is and how it occurs?
Sure. The DNA damage is part of a general area of cellular damage that's done typically by oxidative stress or oxidation, and that's happening because we breathe oxygen, and it's a damaging component of that process. So the only way to get rid of that damage is to not be alive, which is a bad alternative. So the idea is we want to repair the damage as fast as possible. And it occurs not just for the DNA, but the mitochondria, the cell membrane, the proteins, all different cell components are constantly being damaged. And fortunately, our body is constantly repairing them.
Got it. So basically, the very act of breathing essentially causes DNA damage in today's world.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So one thing I've always thought about this, I feel like when it comes to even things like EMFs or anything that's chronic, if we can't see the immediate damage and it isn't immediately noticeable, I think it's an easy thing to ignore for a lot of people. So can you kind of walk us through what are some of the long-term problems that can occur from this DNA damage?
The biggest one, and it's not really a problem, it's a natural process, is aging. That's the indication that we kind of lose the battle and there's more damage than there is repair. So that's the most obvious one. But people also notice a lack of energy. Maybe their immune system gets a bit weaker. They don't sleep as well. That would be less balance in the autonomic nervous system. Maybe they don't detoxify as well as they did. Or there's just there can be a reduction in lean muscle mass. Just all of these things, and most of them are ones we associate with aging, are all indications of that ongoing process.
Got it. Is there any link with DNA damage and anything like, for instance, cancer or chronic disease of any kind?
Yeah, all of them really, because the DNA is the blueprint. It's the template for the next cell. So if there's DNA damage, then the next cell might not be formed perfectly. And if they slowly degrade, again, that's the aging process. And so the DNA damage is absolutely key, and keeping it healthy is essential for the body to replace cells that are also healthy.
Got it. And I know that the idea of telomeres, which maybe you can explain the concept better than I can, they've had their kind of day in the sun recently. There's been a lot of press about them. Does DNA damage, is that affecting the telomeres?
That's not my area of expertise, and it certainly would, that's a key aspect of it. But the telomeres per se are not something we've studied directly. We have looked at double-strand DNA breaks, which are the complex, difficult types of breaks in the DNA, but not telomeres specifically.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, so even just the act of breathing can then damage the DNA. I know my background being in nutrition and lifestyle factors. Are there other things I would guess if just breathing things in the air would also our exposure to chemicals in the environment or poor food, would that also cause DNA damage?
Absolutely. It's those exposures that do that oxidative stress damage and also weaken your body's ability to repair the damage that does occur. So those are key factors. What you eat, what you put on your body, and what you're exposed to are really key to reducing the damage side of the equation.
That makes sense. Okay, so is there scientific evidence that the DNA can be repaired? Is this a reversible problem? And if so, can you kind of walk us through what that mechanism is by which it can be repaired?
Yeah, all of those repair processes are taking place by protein activities. And we tend to think of protein as the kind we eat, but in this case, they're chains of amino acids that must fold perfectly into three-dimensional structures to go out and do their job. Proteins are doing virtually everything in the body, or most things in the body, and one of them includes repairing the DNA or other cell components. And so they, once they're initiated, they go and they rebuild whatever cell component's broken.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand. So I'm also curious, why does the body need help repairing the cells? I guess I try to understand. So if aging is a natural process, normally this would just happen over time. So are you basically saying like we now have the technology to be able to reverse something that was previously not technically reversible, or does the body have a mechanism to do this as well?
I believe that it's only the body that has those mechanisms. The body really needs to repair itself. And what we can do with technology today is encourage it. Some of the things we do with technology today are maybe not so helpful, but the idea is to support the body to do its own thing where the body already, all that repair is done naturally, and it's a matter of just supporting that rather than overriding it.
Got it. So that would also be inclusive of, like you mentioned, a healthy diet and lifestyle as well. And you mentioned, I think, a little bit, and I found this in researching for this podcast. Can you talk about what reactive oxygen species are, kind of in their role?
Yeah, the reactive oxygen species are a free radical, and they are the damaging component. And they also, in the last maybe 20 to 30 years, it's been recognized that certain reactive oxygen species also have a secondary role, or actually a very important role, that works to trigger repair mechanisms. And so they're a little more complicated than we originally thought. And if they have this signaling function, then they emit a specific electromagnetic wavelength that influences the cell and initiates repair. And so this is one of the reasons that people are very cautious now, or hopefully people are cautious now about not overloading on antioxidants, because if you do too many antioxidants, essentially supplemental antioxidants, you can shut down that signaling process, in which case you're kind of undermining your health rather than supporting it.
That's a great point. I know I've seen the research on that recently, and the recommendation to, as much as possible, just obtain antioxidants from food. And I guess you probably agree with that statement. And before we can go deeper in the science, I feel like we also need to introduce the idea of the device that you helped create, the Nano Vi. So can you walk us through what the process was of figuring out how to create this device and what it does?
Yes, it's the scientific research was done by others, essentially, in biology, physics, chemistry. They recognized some of these signaling mechanisms, and also the important role that water plays in the signaling, and in fact in all cellular activities. And so there's a number of areas of science that had all advanced to the point that we could leverage that information. And also the technology had advanced so that it had become possible to mimic what the body's doing technologically. And 20 years ago, that was not possible. And so all these things came together so that we could create this product. But it involved the scientific research, the engineering, research and development, the product development registrations with different countries and regulatory authorities, quality assurance systems, university testing, validation, research, and so on. So overall, it's a big and long process.
Got it. And so can you kind of walk us through the scientific mechanism of how the device works? I know from what you said about DNA damage and the aging process that it obviously acts there. There's a component there. And I will say, having met you in person and the rest of the team, like that's proof enough to me that it works, because you guys all look amazing. But I'm curious to really understand the science.
Yeah, sure. To do that, let me just kind of go through a few key points, because they all kind of build together. The first one is that about 99% of the molecules in the body are water. So the water plays a really key role, and that's what we leverage in our technology. And then secondly, we already discussed how the free radicals or oxidative damage are constantly damaging all the cell components, DNA, proteins, mitochondria, and so on. The next point I think I already made, but just as a reminder, the proteins do all the work in the body. They're called the workhorse of the body, everything from movement to fixing any of the oxidative damage. And the proteins are immersed in water. And so in order for them to function, this is the new bit, in order for them to function, they have to be folded into three-dimensional structures. And it's a complex process where they have to be just the right shape in order to function correctly. And so they interact with the cellular water and create those three-dimensional shapes. Well, of course, the oxidative damage is hurting those shapes and causing them to unfold. And so that's an ongoing process. Where we come in is our device helps the proteins to go through that folding process by influencing the cellular water. So the water that all proteins are immersed in is adjusted slightly by our technology. That helps them to fold correctly. Then they can function correctly. And that is completely up to the body what needs to get done. So all we do is support underneath, and then all the repair mechanisms and priorities and so on that's all established by the body. So none of that natural wisdom is overridden by what we do.
That makes sense. So, and I have a background in research and science, and I feel like this is still even above my head. It's such an amazing concept. So what is the kind of